What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another installment into my Shrek series of reviews. If you're just now hopping on, I am covering all of the Shrek films leading up to the latest Puss in Boots film, The Last Wish, that I actually did not catch in theaters at the tail end of last year, and I heard it was one of the best animated films and arguably one of the best films of 2022. And so far I've covered the first Shrek film, the second Shrek film, and the first Puss in Boots film, alongside two of the Shrek short films that have come out alongside these films. And similar to the last video for Shrek 2, I will also be talking about two shorts in this video as well. So without further ado, let's get right into my thoughts on the third installment into the Shrek franchise, Shrek the Third. Directed by Chris Miller, who would later on direct Puss in Boots, the first film. This film is also directed by Ramon Hui and stars an all-star cast once again of people like Mike Myers, Cameron Diaz, Eddie Murphy, Antonio Banderas, Julie Andrews, and some new faces into this franchise like Eric Idle and Justin Timberlake. So here we are now with the third installment into the Shrek franchise, Shrek the Third. This is easily the one that going into this entire rewatch of the series to cover here on the channel that I was the least confident when it came to my memory on. For some reason, Shrek the Third just didn't stick with me the same way the other films did. And I remember the base premise, so it wasn't like I went into this movie completely having forgotten what happened, but there were a lot of little moments that almost felt like a kind of first time watch rewatching this movie, even though I've seen this movie a number of times. Now, I talked about the first two films being practically masterpieces for me and top tier animation of the early 2000s, and I still feel that way rewatching them today. And a big part of that definitely has to be the nostalgia I have for those first two films, as those first two films were pivotal films of my childhood. And the third film, without a doubt, was definitely a movie that I remember being a big deal. Went to see it in theaters, really enjoyed it, and have seen it multiple times since. But for some reason, there's just always something about this film that tends to be a little bit forgettable. Rewatching it again today, I'm happy to say I still enjoy Shrek the Third, but I gotta be honest in saying that it's probably my least favorite of the first three. This isn't a bad movie by any means, but it just does feel like it's regurgitating a lot of the things that the first two films did, with the second film already kind of taking elements from the first film and flipping it on its head. So by the time you get to the third film, it feels a little bit more redundant and less clever. There are some cool elements about this film that I do thoroughly enjoy, including the third act of the film that's really big and just over the top and bombastic, gives you chills, and includes all the characters that you know and love, as well as some new ones in the mix. The base premise of this film is when it opens up, we're introduced once again to Shrek and Fiona, Donkey, and the gang, and they're in the kingdom of far, far away. And John Cleese's character, the king, who at the tail end of the second film we end up finding out was actually the famed Toad and the Princess and the Toad kind of storyline. He is dying. He's Fiona's father, and they kind of have like a long, drawn-out scene that I believe is meant to be kind of an homage to when Yoda dies in Return of the Jedi, where he looks like he's dying a couple of times and ends up, continually calling for Luke's name. Very similar kind of idea here. It's a funny scene, and it's kind of dark, to be completely honest.
My dear boy, I am proud to call you my son.
And I'm proud to call you my frog king dad-in-law.
Now, there is a matter of business to attend to. The Frog King is dead. Put your head back on, fool.
But yeah, you have this scene now where John Cleese's character, the king, is essentially telling Shrek that you are the new heir now. You are the one who's married to my daughter. Technically, the kingdom is yours. And Shrek is mortified at the even idea of becoming the king of far, far away. So he begs the king to tell him if there's anybody else that could possibly be the heir to the throne. That's when we end up finding out that the heir to the throne that could be is Arthur Pendragon. And Anybody who is familiar with, myths and fables knows, of course, Arthur Pendragon is the famed, Prince of Camelot. Of course, his story is very deeply tied to Merlin, who is in this film as well, but in a more of a cracked out role, not necessarily the big awesome Merlin that you would typically see in other iterations of the story. And in this iteration, Arthur Pendragon, or as he likes to be called, Artie, is played by Justin Timberlake. And so I remember going into this movie and thinking that was a really interesting casting choice, and I wondered if it had anything to do with the fact that they make that reference to Justin Timberlake in the second film. So you have Justin Timberlake as Arthur Pendragon, and now you have Shrek, Donkey, and Puss in Boots going to get this new heir to the throne. But right before going, Fiona decides to drop the bombshell on Shrek that she's pregnant and he's going to be a father. So along the way, not only does he have to combat the idea that he doesn't want to be the king of Far, Far Away, he's also having to recognize that a lot of this running away from being the king is also running away from the responsibility of being a father. So throughout the course of the film, he has to come to terms with the fact that he is going to be a father, which has him scared to death. Which leads, honestly, to one of the weirdest and funniest things that's ever come out of a Shrek movie, where he has this nightmare where he sees all of these babies appearing and leads to some really strange moments.
Ah! Oh! Donkey! Donkey! Wake up!
Dada!
Once Shrek and the gang end up finding Arthur Pendragon, or Artie as he likes to be called, and telling him that he's gonna be the king of Far, Far Away, at first he likes the idea, but then eventually ends up becoming rather reluctant to the idea and is a little bit worried about the responsibility and doesn't necessarily feel like he wants to do that. He also ends up finding out that Shrek was offered the throne first and is pretty upset to know that he pretty much used him in order to kind of escape this responsibility of being king, which ends up kind of putting a bit of a dent in between their relationship. Throughout the course of the film, they use Arthur as this young teenager, though, that Shrek can kind of be a father figure to, which is kind of allowing Shrek to open his heart to the idea of becoming a father and recognizing that his running away from things in general is about to end. He's going to have to start facing change and responsibility. And they kind of use the becoming a king as well as the father thing to do just that. While all of this is going on, you have Prince Charming really upset still because of the events of the finale of the second film that led to the death of his mother, and he's now rallying together with all of the villains of Far, Far Away, all of our fairy tale villains, including characters like Captain Hook and the rest of the gang, and he's getting them all together to come and kill Shrek at the very end of the film. He's trying to lock away Fiona and the other princesses that are on their own adventure, including characters like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and Cinderella. And at the end of the film, Fiona and the rest of the gang must work together to save Shrek from Prince Charming and the rest of the villains, and you end up having Artie become king of Far, Far Away. And that's pretty much what happens in Shrek the Third. And overall, I'm happy to say I enjoyed the film going back and revisiting it. But about halfway through the film, there was a moment in my head that felt I was just a little bit bored in comparison to the first two films. By no means do I think this is a boring film. By no means do I think this is a bad film. But in comparison to those first two, the humor doesn't hit as strong as the first two. In comparison to the first two, the narrative is a little bit more redundant and a little bit more bland than the first two. But I think one thing that this film definitely has the upper hand on is the animation, of course, because Dreamworks from the very first film was putting out phenomenal 3D animation that still holds up today. And I think in comparison to the first two, the third one definitely has substantially better animation, though the story isn't nearly as strong. By the time the movie was coming to an end, I wish I cared more about Artie and Merlin. Merlin is, like I said, kind of a cracked out teacher that has a relationship with Artie versus him actually being the famed Merlin and Arthur Pendragon that we typically know from other iterations. I like what they did here. It's funny, it's slapstick, but it never made for necessarily memorable characters. And one of the things that works for this film and sometimes works against this film is the fact that Shrek and Fiona spend a lot of time apart. She tells Shrek that he's going to be a father right as he's leaving for this adventure, and then the rest of the movie is her mainly with the princesses having to deal with Prince Charming, which Shrek ends up coming back to, which then he ends up finding out what Prince Charming's plan was, and then everybody rescues Shrek. So majority of the film you have Shrek and Fiona apart, which on one hand I thought was cool because you have Shrek being able to kind of go on this personal journey and kind of realize that he can be a father through Arthur Pendragon throughout the course of the film. However, since he doesn't spend a lot of time with Fiona, it doesn't feel like they as a couple really grow together as much in this film, and most of that is really reliant on the first two films. Now, thankfully, those first two films I think do a phenomenal job of really expanding their romance and their characters, so it does work here in the third film, but there was a part of me that felt like they were apart from each other way too long in this third film, though I do appreciate what they were going for. By the time the movie was over, I enjoyed it. I wish I had enjoyed a lot of the new characters more than I actually did, but the third act I think is tons of fun. It's without a doubt the best part of the movie. There's a lot of great callbacks and references to a lot of popular films and franchises, as they have done in previous installments of this franchise, and by the time the movie's over, there's a nice little bow on top. There's a lot of fun that had been had. There's a lot of great funny moments, and it's just fantastic to spend time once again with Shrek, Fiona, Donkey, Puss in Boots, and the rest of the returning cast. Pinocchio, the gingerbread man, all of those characters are tons of fun to see once again in this movie. And while I didn't necessarily fall in love with the new characters introduced in this movie, there's by no means characters that bothered me or had me bored or upset to see them in the movie. The movie is a good time. It's just a huge step down from the first two in my opinion, but still a really great animated film and a great installment in this franchise. So now that we're done talking about Shrek the Third, let's move on to the next short film. I've been covering some of the shorts in this franchise so far. I've already done two so far, and the first one we're going to talk about is actually something that was tied to the second film, and that is Far, Far Away Idol. And this took me back to being a kid. I mean, I remember seeing this short tons of times when I was a kid, and the base premise is they use the exact same stage where the finale of the second film takes place, and all of our main characters do essentially an American Idol type of thing, where they all sing for Shrek, Fiona, and a third celebrity guest, which is Simon Cowell, who actually did come in to voice himself in this. And so he's, dressed in, Shrek garb, but it is Simon Cowell, and they all sing. You have the great moments where Simon Cowell is just completely crapping all over these characters as they're singing poorly, and in the end ends up having his own musical number, which clearly he did not sing. It's a fun, very silly, very straight to the point short that I think works for the most part. It was nostalgic for me, so I enjoyed it. There's really not much to it other than the characters singing, similar to one of the shorts I covered in the last video, but for the most part, I enjoyed myself. And then let's talk about the other short that I ended up checking out for this, which was the first time watch for me actually, and that is Donkey's Christmas Shrektacular, which is tied more to the fourth film and includes some of the characters from the fourth film that we haven't talked about yet. And in this, you pretty much just have all of the Shrek characters, including some, like I mentioned, that are in the fourth film, singing various Christmas songs, sometimes with a little bit of a Shrek twist on it. And for the most part, this was cute, and that's pretty much all I can really say on it. Me and my fiance watched it. It was a first time watch for the two of us, and I think at this point, watching a few of these shorts that are just them singing, it's just kind of like whatever. It's nothing about it that's really exciting to watch, nothing about it that's really engaging to watch. I like the ones that are a little bit more narrative based, even if it's really short. Unfortunately, most of them have been sing-alongs or something that has to do with popular music. And I liked Far, Far Away Idol, and I even liked the one that they did, the karaoke one, the swamp karaoke that they did for the first Shrek film. But I think at this point, having seen a few of them, it does start to feel just samey, and this is just another version of those, but a Christmas version. And of course, I recognize that these are for kids, but I was a kid when these things came out, or at least substantially younger, so there is a nostalgia to seeing these characters do this. But I think at this point, I'm hoping that the remaining shorts we have are a little bit more narrative based than just being musical numbers or sing-alongs, which are fun but can be rather boring at times. And that's it, guys. That's going to be my thoughts on Shrek the Third, as well as the two shorts we talked about today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. What are your guys' thoughts on Shrek the Third? Do you enjoy this film just as much as the first two films? Or are you in the camp with me where you think it's a good movie, but not as good as the first two films? Definitely want to hear whatever you guys have to say down below. So first of all, hit that like button because it really helps the channel out, and leave your comments down below letting me know what you thought about this video, these movies, whatever the case may be. And again, a big thanks to you guys for supporting the channel. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.